The oven won't light. Elon's fingers tremble slightly as he pushes the knob inward, listening for the familiar click, click, click of ignition. Nothing. He turns it off and tries again. Click, click. Still nothing. No glow, no heat, not even the scent of gas. Just silence. The raw turkey sits on the counter like a dare, a 15-pound monument to everything he's trying to fix. Elon pushes the knob again, harder this time, like force could somehow redeem him. He presses his palm against the inside wall of the oven. Cold. A beat of silence. Then panic. It starts small, a tightening in his throat, a crackle of heat behind his eyes. Then the familiar inner voice, cruel and immediate. Of course the oven doesn't work. Of course it fails. Just like you did. Just like always. Elon. April, his girlfriend, stands in the doorway, already dressed in black leggings and a faded hoodie, her gym bag slung across one shoulder. Her hair's tied back, and she looks impossibly calm for someone about to witness a family dinner in the making. "Everything okay with the bird?" she asks, cheerful but careful. "Yeah, all good." He doesn't meet her eyes. April steps closer, peeking over his shoulder at the untouched turkey. "You sure?" "I've got it under control," he lies. She lingers for a beat. "I'll be back by noon. I told Melanie I couldn't stay long. You'll call me if you need anything?" He nods. And just like that, she's gone, leaving behind the echo of a door that doesn't quite shut all the way, and a room that suddenly feels too loud with silence. Elon stares at the turkey, then at the oven, then back at the turkey. He exhales, wipes his hands on a dish towel, and grabs the roasting pan. 3 minutes later, he's knocking on the neighbor's door. No answer. He knocks again, louder this time. Nothing. Upstairs, maybe. He races up the narrow staircase 2 steps at a time and knocks on the door of the apartment above. It creaks open just a sliver. A middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses and an unfriendly expression eyes him suspiciously. "My oven's not working," Elon explains quickly. "I just need to borrow yours for a couple hours. I have a turkey and—" "Not interested," the man interrupts, then shuts the door in his face. Elon stands frozen for a second, then turns slowly, his hand still wrapped around the cold roasting pan, the uncooked bird looking heavier than ever. But this didn't start with an oven. It started at dawn when Elon woke to find sunlight slicing across the hardwood floor of his tiny studio apartment in Palo Alto. He hadn't slept well. His mind had kept him hostage all night, pacing the same tight circle. "They're coming. You invited them. You asked for this." The bed was still warm, where April had been. She always got up early. She was the only person in his life who never needed to be convinced he was worth trying for. Now he stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring at an empty roasting pan and a pile of recipe clippings he didn't quite understand. His list, written in red pen on a scrap of engineering notebook paper, lay crumpled on the counter, littered with crossed-out ingredients and over-ambitious notes like candied ginger glaze? And brine overnight? Too late. At the exact same moment, hundreds of miles north, Mae Musk was folding and unfolding the same scarf for the 4th time. Her suitcase sat open on the bed, half-packed. She adjusted a bottle of perfume, then removed it again. Her mother, a woman of few words, watched her silently from the armchair in the corner. Downstairs, Elon Musk was stacking cassette tapes into the glove compartment of the station wagon. "Maybe something upbeat for the drive," he muttered to himself, choosing a Beach Boys mix. Tosca, 20 and furrowed-browed, leaned against the doorway with crossed arms. "We're driving 8 hours to see a brother who ignored 3 birthdays, 2 Thanksgivings, and mom's gallbladder surgery." Kimball, 16 and ever observant, stood behind her with his high-8 camcorder. He'd been recording everything since sunrise. Through the lens, the whole trip felt less personal, more manageable. In the car, they exchanged pleasantries that fell flat. Gas prices. Weather. Is the heat on too high? Did someone pack almonds? At one point, Mae whispered, "It's just a dinner, right?" No one answered. Back in Palo Alto, Elon had realized he forgot the list. But he went to the store anyway, relying on memory and desperation. His cart swayed down the aisles as he guessed at which herbs made something taste like home. Now, after the failed oven and the slammed door upstairs, Elon stood on the sidewalk outside the building, turkey still in arms. A cold wind brushed past his face. He blinked once, then again. He had invited them. He had said the words, "Come for dinner." But no one, not even him, believed he'd pull it off. And yet, here he was. Sometimes what breaks us isn't an explosion. It's a small thing, a cold oven on Thanksgiving morning. But sometimes what saves us is small too. You just haven't seen that part yet. Dear viewer, if something in Elon's struggle today stirred a memory in you, even a quiet one, let us know in the comments. And if you want to see where this story goes, stay with us. Your time here means more than you know. Tap subscribe if you'd like to walk this road with us a little longer. The road curved like memory itself, winding, rising, falling, through cities too quiet and hills too brown for November. Inside the car there was warmth, but not comfort. Only the kind of closeness that made everyone more aware of what wasn't being said. May leaned her head against the window, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. From time to time, her fingers brushed the glass, as though tracing a path she could no longer see. She was elegant, always had been, but that day she carried the silence of someone who had rehearsed forgiveness more times than she'd ever spoken aloud. Errol, behind the wheel, tried to keep the mood from sinking. He offered half-hearted jokes, mostly about traffic or aging cassette tapes. But even his own laughter refused to rise. The smile lines on his face had faded over the years, replaced by something harder, not cruelty, but the fatigue of a man who'd stopped hoping things would ever make sense again. In the back seat, Tosca was already on the offense. "Let's just remember he skipped Mom's surgery," she said, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Didn't show up to Kimball's graduation, or last Christmas, or the 3 before that. How exactly are we pretending this dinner will solve anything?" Kimball didn't answer. He was behind the camera now, as usual, aiming his high 8 through the smudged glass. "It's Thanksgiving," he said softly, more to the lens than to anyone in the car. "And it might be the last time we see him." He paused, adjusted focus. "That's worth documenting." May turned slightly at those words, her eyes meeting her son's with a flicker of sadness, not because he was wrong, but because he might be right. She said nothing. Only gave him that look mothers give when love outweighs disagreement, even when it hurts. The soft rustle of fabric came from beside her. Her mother, small, dignified, eyes shut in fragile sleep, dozed gently with a silk handkerchief resting on her lap. May had given it to her years ago. Elon had picked out back when he still called every Sunday. It was pale blue with tiny stitched flowers. He had insisted she wrap it carefully like it mattered. May had kept it all these years. And now there it was again, folded across her mother's knees like a memory, refusing to fade. The silence in the car thickened, not heavy but wide. It didn't press down on them. It surrounded them. May reached for the small album she'd hidden beneath her coat. She had almost left it behind, but some instinct told her she'd want it close. She opened it quietly, flipping through pages with well-worn corners. There was Elon, age 5, smeared with flour, grinning beside a failed batch of cookies. There was Elon, age 10, building a rocket out of a cereal box. Elon at 16, eyes already distant, holding a model spacecraft he wouldn't let anyone touch. She closed the album before the next photo. She knew what it showed. Elon at 18, boarding the bus to college, jaw clenched, suitcase in one hand, eyes refusing to look back. Errol noticed. "You okay?" he asked gently. May exhaled long and slow. "I'm tired of running from who we were," she said. "Tired of pretending we didn't break." Errol nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. He didn't say it, but the word she used, "we," stung, because it included him. And he knew she was right. "Mark my words," Tosca cut in again, breaking the quiet. "This'll be another disaster. He'll burn the food or disappear halfway through, or make some passive-aggressive comment about our lives being ordinary. He never could just show up and be normal." Kimball finally lowered the camera. He's not normal, Tosca. That's the point. He's Elon. That's not an excuse, she snapped. No, May said softly, but it's part of the truth. The car fell silent again. This time, not from distance, but wait. I don't expect a miracle, May continued, but I need him to see me. Just once. Not as the person he left. Not as the mother who failed him. As me. Now. Before there's no more time. Errol glanced at her, then back to the road. He tightened his grip on the wheel. Outside, signs began to shift. More traffic, more palm trees, more glimpses of pale stucco and blinking shop signs. The sprawl of the Bay Area was creeping in. Palo Alto was close. Too close. The closer they got, the more time seemed to twist, the minutes stretching, then snapping back. The kind of journey that feels both too long and too short, depending on what you're afraid of. In the passenger mirror, May's reflection looked like a woman both arriving and fleeing. She opened her purse and took out a small tube of lipstick. Her favorite, deep coral, slightly faded at the edges. She angled the mirror toward her and tried to apply it, but her hand shook. The line came out crooked. She wiped it off, then tried again. Still uneven. She sighed. Errol noticed. He reached over and gently placed his hand over hers. It's just a dinner, he said. With Elon. May didn't answer, because they both knew it wasn't just a dinner. It was a reckoning. A question asked with a turkey and silverware. A hope folded into napkins. 1,000 unsaid things simmering just below the surface of every bite. Behind them, Tosca finally fell silent. Kimball started recording again, this time without speaking. And beside May, her mother stirred. The silk handkerchief shifted slightly in her lap, catching the light. No one said anything, but all of them, in their own way, were bracing for the same moment. The moment when the door would open, and the past, all of it, would be sitting at the table waiting. The knock was soft, not timid but careful, the kind of sound made by someone at the edge of hope. Elon stood outside the third apartment he'd tried, cradling the roasting pan, as if it held not just a raw turkey, but something infinitely more fragile. The metal had long since numbed his fingers through the dish towel. He raised his hand again to knock, when the door opened with a quiet creak. A small woman stood there, Korean, elderly, wrapped in a pale pink cardigan and floral house slippers. Her silver-gray hair was pulled into a tight bun. Her face was a gentle map of time. Deep lines, soft folds, eyes that had watched things end and begin too many times to count. She took him in slowly, her gaze moving from the pan to his face, then back again. Yes, she asked, her voice calm and melodic, touched by an accent that softened each syllable. Elon hesitated. He hadn't planned how to ask this. My oven broke. I was supposed to cook this for someone important. I know it's odd, but do you think I could use yours? Just for a few hours? The woman's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer. Then she nodded, stepped aside, and said simply, "Come in." He nearly sighed in disbelief, muttering, "Thank you," as he crossed the threshold. The apartment was warm and neat, smelling faintly of ginger and wood polish. Traditional Korean ink paintings lined the walls. There were framed photos too, some in black and white, others colored with the fading tones of the 70s and 80s. A girl on a swing. A graduatium capitulo. A wedding. He followed her to the small kitchen, where she cleared a counter with elegant efficiency and preheated the oven. He set the pan down with reverence. "I'm Mrs. Han," she said. "Elon," he replied. "Elon Musk." She nodded, neither impressed nor surprised, only interested. "Why such trouble?" she asked gently, turning the oven dial to 325 degrees. He exhaled, finally placing the towel down. "Because it's my last chance to make something right." She turned to face him, curious now. "For who?" "My mom and my siblings. We haven't all been in the same room in years. Things fell apart, mostly because of me." He let the words fall slowly, each one heavier than the last. "I thought I could fix it. With a dinner. With this turkey." He laughed once, quietly, bitterly. "I don't even know what I'm doing." Mrs. Han didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. Her face remained open, receptive. "You're trying," she said. "That matters more than you think." They sat at the small table while the oven hummed behind them. Elon leaned forward, hands clasped, trying not to look like someone unraveling at the seams. Mrs. Han folded her hands in her lap. "I haven't seen my daughter in 7 years," she said softly. He looked up. "She said I loved her conditionally, that I only saw what I wanted to see. She moved to New York. I stayed here. We speak through silence now." Her eyes didn't water, but something in her expression cracked. "She used to eat everything I made, especially my sweet rice dumplings. I still make them. I pack them up and give them to neighbors. I don't know why. Maybe I'm hoping one day she'll knock." A long silence passed between them. "I grew up thinking success would fix things," Elon said. "If I just worked hard enough, built something big enough, then no one could say I failed. But now I think I confuse noise with meaning. Maybe even now I'm doing this all wrong." Mrs. Han shook her head. "Love is not an achievement. It's a persistence." Elon let those words settle in the air. A faint smell began to rise, rosemary, lemon, garlic, reaching through the apartment like a thread of memory. The heat from the oven filled the small room, and for the first time in hours, Elon stopped shaking. He looked at her again. "You're the only one who opened the door." She met his gaze calmly. "My mother taught me, when someone is trying to begin again, let them." He stared at the oven. "I wish I could go back, do it all differently." "You can't," she said, "but you can arrive." Outside, a car honked distantly. The clock on the wall ticked toward noon. The oven beeped. They both stood. Elon moved to the counter, carefully pulling out the pan. The skin was golden, crisp at the edges, juices crackling. But wasn't the smell or the sight that made his throat tighten. It was the look in Mrs. Han's eyes, kind, quiet, and full of a shared understanding neither had asked for. He turned to her, holding the pan like something sacred. "Thank you," he whispered. "Not just for the oven, for seeing me." Mrs. Han gave him a soft nod. "Be seen, Elon, before it's too late." He stepped out into the hallway, turkey in his arms, the heat of her apartment still lingering on his skin. And yet, as he walked back toward his own front door, to the silence that waited, to the family that may or may not arrive, he felt something impossible. Hope baked into the skin of the bird. And something else, too. A beginning. "He used to make little robots out of aluminum foil," May said quietly, her voice drifting like steam from a cup of tea. "With Kimball. Do you remember that?" Errol chuckled softly behind the wheel, his eyes flicking toward the rearview mirror. He even gave them names. One had bottle caps for eyes. "Oh God," Tosca muttered, arms crossed in the back seat. They weren't robots. They were messes with batteries taped to them. May smiled, but it was a nostalgic kind of smile, the kind that coats grief in sugar. They made the kitchen smell like burning metal for a week. From beside Tosca, Kimball pulled the high-8 camcorder off his lap and flipped open the tiny screen. "I found something," he said, voice laced with shy excitement. He pressed play. The screen lit up with the grainy flicker of childhood. Elon, 10 years old, in a too-big sweater, crouched in the backyard. 2 empty soda bottles, baking soda and vinegar. A shaky voice, probably Kimball's, counting down. 3, 2, 1. FZZZZZT. The bottle launched sideways, hit the fence, and splashed. Elon shrieked with laughter. "It's propulsion. Did you see? It worked." Even Tosca laughed. Just a little. May blinked fast and looked out the window. Her voice was smaller now. "I miss hearing him play the cello. Sunday mornings, remember? Before breakfast." "I think he still plays," Errol said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Only now no one listens." The words landed softly like snow, but their weight was undeniable. No one spoke for a long time. In the back seat, their grandmother stirred beneath her scarf. Her hands shifted in her lap, eyes blinking open. "Are we in California yet?" she asked, her voice dry, paper thin. "We're close, Grandma," May said gently. "We're almost there." Meanwhile, across town, Elon stood alone in the silence of his apartment. The turkey sat proudly in the center of a wobbly fold-out table, surrounded by last-minute touches, a bouquet of orange tulips from the corner market, 2 candles in mismatched holders, and cloth napkins he'd borrowed from a neighbor, not Mrs. Hahn, a different one. He had ironed them carefully, his hands trembling as he folded each with near-ceremonial focus. It felt like preparing for an audience that may never come. The scent of roasted rosemary filled the air. Elon moved around the table, adjusting silverware angles, smoothing creases. At one end, he placed a short stack of place cards, handwritten on small rectangles of thick white paper. Mom, Dad, Tosca, Kimball, Grandma. He read each aloud under his breath as he set them at the appropriate seats, almost like saying a prayer. The names sat heavy on the linen, like unopened letters. Each card bore a weight no ink could express, his regrets, his silences, the things he never found words for. Especially the ones he didn't think anyone would have wanted to hear. A sudden noise in the hallway made his heart spike. He looked toward the door, expectant, but was only a neighbor. Groceries. A paper bag rustled. Footsteps passed. Silence returned. April still hadn't come back. He glanced at the clock. The hour was approaching. He rubbed his palms against his jeans and paced. Then stopped. Then paced again. He walked to the small table by the door and opened the drawer, pulling out a blue pen. Then sat at the edge of the table, not to eat, not yet, but to write. A note for each place. For his mother, thank you for still believing there's something left in me worth driving across the country for. For his father, I know you don't show it, but I remember the time you stayed up all night to help me fix that broken printer. I never said thank you. For Tosca, I was always too quiet. You always filled the room. I envied that. I still do. For Kimball, you filmed everything. You always wanted to remember. I was too afraid to. And for his grandmother, you never stopped writing letters, even when I never replied. He placed each note beneath the place cards like a secret offering. Then he stood in the center of a room and simply waited. Minutes passed, maybe more. Eventually, Elon sat down on the small bench beside the door. He rested his back against the wall, arms folded over his stomach, and closed his eyes. He didn't pray, but he did wish. Quietly, like a child. Outside, the family car turned onto a narrow residential street. The pavement cracked in places, lined with modest trees. The sun was low now, casting gold across the buildings. There it is, Errol said, nodding toward a tan complex. May leaned forward, her hand bracing against the dashboard. As the apartment came into view, her breath caught. She hadn't expected the flowers in the window. She hadn't expected to feel this. Tears filled her eyes. Not the loud kind. The kind that arrive without warning, like an old friend showing up unannounced. Kimball lowered the camcorder. Tosca said nothing for once. The grandmother, barely awake, whispered, "Smells like rosemary." And for the first time in years, they were almost home. The car slowed to a stop in front of the aging apartment building. Its outer walls, once a cheerful beige, were now streaked with rust-colored stains and patches where paint had peeled like tired memories. A crooked mailbox leaned under the stairwell. The buzzers beside the door were faded and dented, some marked only with scratches where names used to be. Tosca leaned forward in her seat, peering through the windshield with an arched brow. Seriously? He lives here? Kimball lowered the viewfinder on his camcorder just enough to glance sideways at her, but said nothing. May didn't respond either. She simply smoothed the fabric of her pale blue dress, one she hadn't worn in years, reserved for occasions that might require grace, and exhaled slowly. She tucked a strand of silver blonde hair behind her ear, then reached for the door handle. Errol was already out of the car. He circled to the passenger side, offering his hand to May's mother, who blinked at the daylight and adjusted the silk scarf on her lap. "Watch your step," Errol murmured gently, steadying her as she stood. Kimball turned the camera back on, quietly capturing the moment as the 5 of them gathered on the uneven sidewalk. They didn't speak. They didn't smile. They just stood there, the building looming before them like a question none of them knew how to answer. They walked toward the entrance slowly. The air smelled faintly of dried leaves and someone else's cooking. May's heels clicked softly on the concrete. Tosca crossed her arms tightly across her chest. The grandmother's hand trembled slightly in Errol's. At the top of the stairs, no one moved to press the buzzer. On the third floor, Elon froze. He had been rearranging a spoon for the third time when he heard it, footsteps on the stairs. Slow, hesitant, familiar. He wiped his palms on his jeans. The room behind him was still and perfect. Candles lit, tulips upright, turkey warm and waiting. Every detail meticulously placed. Nothing else to fix. And now they were here. He walked to the door quietly, his socked feet making no sound. He stopped when he reached it, just inches from the handle. His breath caught in his throat. He reached out and placed his hand on the doorknob, fingers trembling. At that very moment, May did the same on the other side. Neither turned it. A silence unfolded, thick, elastic, stretched across years. On both sides of the door stood a soul unsure whether to move forward or retreat. It was Tosca who broke it. One sharp knock. Not impatient, but declarative. Elon flinched, stepping back, a hand briefly pressed to his chest as if calming something wild inside. He closed his eyes, then opened them, then opened the door. The light from a hallway spilled into the room, illuminating a tableau that seemed suspended in time. On one side, Elon, taller than they remembered, lean and tense, flannel sleeves rolled, hair tousled from nervous hands. His eyes were glassy. He forced a smile, small and unsure, as if it might break under its own weight. On the other, May in her blue dress, hands still hovering near the handle, her hazel green eyes searching her son's face like it might offer some forgotten map. She smiled too, tentatively, but didn't step forward. Neither did he. There was no embrace, just a pause, dense, aching, sacred. Errol, always allergic to tension, cleared his throat. Son. Looks good in here. He nodded toward the table behind Elon. Elon blinked, breaking the moment. Thanks, he murmured. Then came the softest sound, fabric moving, slippers brushing wood. May's mother stepped forward. She reached up and gently placed her palm against Elon's cheek. Her hand was cool and papery, but her touch was steady. You still have the eyes of an inventor, she said, with a smile that crinkled every corner of her face. He held her hand there a moment longer. Grandma. The others followed in slow procession. Kimball entered with wide eyes, camcorder now lowered at his side. Tosca stayed near the doorway, arms still crossed, but her sharp expression had dulled into something closer to guarded awe. The tension lingered like smoke, but the table began to change things. The smell of rosemary and lemon filled the room. The tulips nodded in their jar like they were welcoming old friends. The handwritten notes peeked from beneath the name cards, silent invitations to reconciliation. May stepped forward last. She stood before her seat, ran her fingers gently along the edge of the tablecloth, then looked at Elon again. You remembered my favorite flower, she said softly, her voice almost breaking. Orange tulips. Elon nodded. You used to put them by the piano. There was a beat, and then May sat down. One by one, the others followed. No one said grace. No one toasted. But they stayed. And for Elon, that was enough for now. One by one, they stepped across the threshold as if entering a chapel built from memory. The apartment wasn't grand. It wasn't even tidy, not really. The rug near the door curled slightly at the corner. A light flickered above the stove. The walls bore the faint ghosts of old posters, long since taken down. And yet, in that moment, none of that mattered. Elon stood to the side, silently ushering them in. His hands hung awkwardly at his sides, fingers twitching now, and then as if unsure whether to offer help or stay still. Tosca was the first to speak, though not to him. Her eyes flitted from object to object, a map of subtle judgment unfolding across her face. She noticed the crooked light switch near the door, the fraying edge of the tablecloth, the mismatched chairs, the single candle flickering just slightly off-center. "Charming," she muttered, barely audible. Elon didn't flinch. He turned to his grandmother and guided her toward the table. His movements were delicate, precise. He pulled the chair back slowly, as if it might shatter under the weight of history and expectation. She lowered herself with effort, one hand resting on his for balance. "Thank you, my boy," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. May lingered near the edge of the room. Her gaze swept over everything. The orange tulips, the tiny folded place cards with names in Elon's careful handwriting, the stiff linen napkins that bore the creases of a rushed but earnest iron. Her fingers traced the back of a chair absent-mindedly. She didn't sit yet. Errol broke the silence. "Smells good in here," he said, smiling with effort. "That turkey's got the scent of a good story behind it." Elon gave a half-smile and nodded once, then moved toward the oven. His motions were careful, subdued. He plated the turkey in portions, his knife slicing without confidence, his fork trembling just slightly. He passed each plate gently to its recipient, his eyes never quite meeting theirs, like each gesture was not only an offering, but also an apology. The table was full, yet the silence around it felt sacred. Each person occupied their chair with a mix of posture and armor. They were family, but at that moment they were also witnesses to something fragile and unknown. It was the grandmother who finally spoke, her voice like the first snow, quiet, unexpected, undeniable. "It's beautiful, my grandson," she said, resting her hands in her lap. Elon looked up, startled, eyes glassy again. He nodded once more, unable to speak. May added softly, still not meeting his gaze, "It is." The words hung in the air. Neither a declaration nor a forgiveness, just a presence. Just enough. Tosca broke the spell with a small grunt. "It could use more salt," she muttered, poking at a roasted carrot. Before she could say more, May turned sharply to her, eyebrows lifted in warning. No words were needed. Tosca looked down. Kimball, unnoticed until now, floated quietly around the room, camera rolling. The red light blinked softly as he documented the moment, the napkins, the tension, the tulips, the subtle arc of forgiveness starting to form in the shadows between bodies. Then Elon did something unexpected. "Would anyone like to say something?" he asked. His voice was quiet, strained, the words pressing against his chest as if carved from bone. "Before we eat." A pause. All eyes shifted. Errol cleared his throat and straightened in his chair. "I'll say something," he offered, glancing around, searching for courage in the wallpaper. He set his fork down. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the food, for the effort, for trying. Sometimes that's the hardest part." The silence afterward was different. Not sharp, not uncomfortable. It was warm, like space had been made. May lowered her eyes. Her hand brushed lightly over the table, fingertips grazing the edge of her place card. The lines around her mouth tightened, but her shoulders softened just barely. Elon didn't speak. Under the table, he pressed his fingertips into his thigh, as if grounding himself. He felt tethered to the moment by something invisible but real. A thread, a promise, a pulse. Everyone lifted their forks almost in unison. The turkey was tender, the gravy imperfect, the carrots a little too soft. But none of that mattered. They chewed in silence, but it wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of something else. Tosca looked up once. Kimball smiled without knowing it. May wiped the corner of her mouth with the napkin Elon had folded. Errol reached for a second slice of turkey. No one said what they were feeling. No one needed to. And in the smallest, most unexpected of ways, it was enough. Midway through the meal, just as the conversation was beginning to breathe on its own, May coughed into her napkin. It was soft, almost polite, but sharp enough to cut through the gentle hum of silverware against ceramic. Tosca looked over, her brows tightening. "Do you want to go back to the car, Mom?" she asked, already half rising from her seat. May lifted one hand, not to wave her off, but to anchor herself. "No," she said, her voice low but deliberate. I came to have dinner with my son. The statement landed in the center of the table, like a small but powerful weight. No one responded right away, but no one looked away either. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It had changed. It no longer avoided the cracks, it held them. It no longer tried to outrun the past, it sat with it. Elon looked up, startled by the tone more than the words. A flicker of something unfamiliar passed across his face, not triumph, not even relief. Just warmth. Quiet, hard-earned warmth. He offered a brief smile, one corner of his mouth tugging upward, and reached for the ladle. "More gravy?" he asked, his voice gentler now. May nodded, and he poured a slow ribbon of it across her turkey. The room remained hushed, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was listening. Then, like a sudden gust through a half-open window, the grandmother spoke. "Do you remember," she began, her voice papery but steady, "when May was 8 and she stole that garden hose to make a rope swing in the neighbor's tree?" Everyone turned to May. Her eyes widened in mock protest. "I didn't steal it. I borrowed it. And I returned it, eventually." Errol chuckled, with half of it shredded and tied in knots. Even Tosca smirked. Kimball gave a soft laugh and lifted the camera again. And Elon laughed too. It started as a breath, caught between ribs. Then it rolled out, awkward and unpracticed but real. His eyes crinkled, and for the first time that evening, his whole face joined in. His laugh met May's, hers smaller, like a door cautiously opening, but no less true. The sound lingered, warm and unexpected, like music rediscovered after years of silence. The moment held. Then Tosca reflexively reached for her pager, the tiny device lighting up with a silent blink. But before her thumb could press the button, Errol placed his hand gently over hers. "Not today," he said. "Let this be what it is." Tosca hesitated. Then, surprisingly, she nodded and set it aside. Elon stood, brushing his hands on a dish towel he had slung over his shoulder. "Dessert," he said, almost as an offering. "Pumpkin pie, sort of homemade." He disappeared into the kitchen, and May watched him through the archway. There was something in the way he moved, not polished, not sure, but deliberate. He took his time, sliding the knife carefully through the pie, placing each slice on mismatched plates. His elbows were too close to his sides, his shoulders slightly raised, like he was still afraid the whole thing might fall apart. "He tried," May whispered. It was to no one in particular, and yet everyone heard it. When he returned, he placed a slice in front of her first. "It's not perfect," he said, his eyes flickering to hers, "but I wanted this to be about us. Just us. Even for one night." May didn't answer right away. She looked down at the pie, then back at him. Her hand rose slowly and rested over his. Her fingers were cool, thin, and trembling, but they held him. For a brief second, they both held on. Across the table, Kimball turned the lens toward them. He didn't zoom in. He didn't need to. The moment said everything. The table, once stiff with unspoken things, now held space for something else. Its surface bore invisible hairline fractures, wounds left by years of absence, misunderstanding, disappointment, but those fractures were being filled, not with answers, but with presence, with eye contact, with softened shoulders and unguarded silences. Like the Japanese art of kintsugi, the brokenness didn't disappear. It simply made room for beauty. And then came the sound of rushed footsteps in the hallway. The door creaked open, and there she was, April, breathless, hair wind-tossed, cheeks flushed with urgency. In her hand, she clutched a single orange tulip, now crumpled from a journey. "I'm so sorry," she said between breaths, stepping fully inside. "I couldn't find the right one, but I brought this." Elon turned to her, his face shifting instantly, softening in a way only love could do. He took the flower with reverence, then looked back at his family. "This is April," he said, "my partner." May rose from her chair slowly. She studied the young woman, her posture, her eyes, the way she held Elon's gaze. "Do you take care of him?" May asked, her voice level but direct. April smiled, her hand slipping quietly into Elon's. "With everything I have, she replied. May looked at them for a long moment. Then, and only then, did she smile. A true smile. And though nothing had been fully healed, and many words still waited behind ribs and teeth, something essential had begun. The pie cooled slowly. The table held. And for the first time in years, so did they. The dinner had ended, but no one stood up. The plates lay empty, silverware resting at quiet angles, and candlelight flickered softly over the remnants of a meal that had turned into something far more than food. The room was hushed but full of something that hadn't been there in years. There was weight in the stillness, but it wasn't heavy. It was something warmer, like the aftermath of an honest conversation. May stayed in her chair, hands lightly folded in her lap, her posture still, but not stiff. Beside her, her mother had dozed off in her seat, her fingers gently woven together, chin lowered toward her chest. It was the kind of sleep that came not just from age, but from emotional release. She wore the expression of someone who had seen enough for one night and chosen to rest inside the comfort of presence. No one dared to raise their voice. May cleared her throat, breaking the quiet gently. "Do you have any tea?" Elon nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Yeah, let me get it." He moved toward the kitchen, not in a rush, but with that same cautious purpose he had shown all evening, as if worried each step might crack the fragile shell of connection that had just begun to form around them. He reached for the kettle, his hand trembling slightly. The sound of running water filled the room, soothing in its familiarity. When he placed the kettle on the burner and turned on the flame, the blue fire whooshed to life with a low, steady hiss. A few seconds later, he heard quiet steps behind him. Tosca. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. She didn't speak right away. He didn't turn. "Why now?" she asked finally, voice even. He stayed facing the stove, his hands braced on the edge of the counter. "Because if I waited any longer, I might never get another chance." She didn't move, but something in her face shifted. The sharpness softened just slightly. "I know I've been selfish," Elon added, "but I didn't know how to come back. Not until I realized it was either now or never." Tosca stared at him for a moment, her eyes scanning his profile like she was looking at an unfinished puzzle. "Well," she said finally, uncrossing her arms, "at least you cooked. That's something." He glanced back, and she walked out without another word. Back at the table, May watched the steam curl from her teacup. She held it with both hands, as though trying to memorize its warmth. "It still tastes the same," she said quietly. "Your tea, just like when you were 12. Elon blinked. He hadn't expected that. "You remember that?" She smiled faintly, her eyes never leaving the cup. "Some things don't go away." He sat down beside her again, his own chipped mug warming his fingers. Kimball had pulled out his camcorder and was quietly editing clips, the soft glow of the screen lighting up his thoughtful face. He tapped a few buttons, then turned the screen toward his mother. "Look at this." May leaned in. On the screen, shaky footage of laughter around the table, Elon carving the turkey the moment he placed a slice of pie in front of her. And then the image of her reaching out and touching his hand. When it ended, she blinked, then touched the corner of her eye. "It's moments like these," she said, "the ones where we try. Those are the ones that last." Elon looked around the room. Tosca sat with her legs crossed, her pager set aside. Kimball adjusted the focus of his camera. April and Arrow were washing dishes side by side, exchanging quiet, pleasant words. His chest felt tighter, but not in a painful way. More like it was being stitched back together bit by bit. He remembered how lonely the apartment had felt just that morning. The silence had once been crushing, but now it was a silence filled with breath and presence. He stood again, walked back to the kitchen, and returned with a small bowl of cookies the Korean neighbor had offered him along with a pie. He set them in the center of the table. "Dessert part 2, he said awkwardly. Kimball chuckled. "You're spoiling us." Elon smiled. Not big, but real. May reached for a cookie, her hand grazing his again. "Thank you," she said, this time not just for the food. April walked back into the room, holding a damp towel, and a dish she had just dried. She seemed hesitant, unsure of where to place herself in the family's dynamic. Elon noticed and cleared his throat. "Everyone, this is April." May looked at the young woman, studied her face for a moment, then asked, "Do you take care of him?" April, a bit caught off guard, nodded slowly. "With everything I have." May smiled, small but sincere. "Then you're welcome here." The moment landed quietly and then drifted into the warmth of the room. Later, as the table began to clear and May rested her head on her palm, Elon carried the teapot back to the stove. The leftovers were packed. The pie was nearly gone. The lights had dimmed slightly, as if the night were ready to close its curtain. But no one moved to leave. No one checked the time. They stayed in a circle of flickering candlelight and faint music playing on a static-prone radio in the corner. There were no grand confessions, no sweeping apologies. Just the tiny repairs made by presence, by softness, by shared memory. And for the first time in a long, long while, Elon felt like a thread in the fabric again. Not the patch, not the hole, but the thread that held something together. And in that fragile unity, he discovered something so quiet, so gentle, it took his breath away. He still had time. The night settled over Silicon Valley like a thick, woolen blanket, quiet, heavy, and deeply personal. Streetlights hummed outside the apartment window, their glow softened by the curtain's delicate weave. Inside, the overhead bulbs had been dimmed, and what remained was a golden hush of lamplight and flickering candles, illumination that seemed to understand it was intruding on something sacred. May shifted in her chair. The fatigue from the long drive, the emotional weight of the reunion, and the vulnerability of the dinner had caught up with her. "I think I need to lie down for a moment," she said quietly, barely lifting her eyes. Elon stood immediately. "Of course," he replied, voice low and instinctively gentle. He found extra cushions from the sofa and stacked them on the carpeted floor beside the small bookcase. Then he laid down a soft knit blanket, the same one he used when he'd fallen asleep on the couch weeks ago, trying to figure out how to roast a turkey. May lowered herself slowly, carefully, and Elon adjusted the pillow beneath her neck. Once she was lying down, he crouched nearby, his eyes studying her breathing. The subtle rise and fall of her chest, the occasional furrow of her brow, the way one hand gently rested over her stomach. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Just watching her like this made his throat tighten with something he couldn't quite name. In the kitchen, a surprising clatter. Tosca, previously cold and sarcastic, was boiling water. She found chamomile tea in the cupboard and prepared a cup for their grandmother. Without flourish, she carried it into the living room and placed it gently on the table beside the older woman. No one said anything, but the silence was full of meaning. A small act, softened pride, unspoken love. By the window, Errol stood beside April, arms crossed, watching the shadows of the family stretch across the apartment. "He's changing," he murmured, more to himself than to her. April nodded, eyes still on Elon as he adjusted the blanket over May again. "He's trying with everything he has," she said softly. Her voice carried no hope or despair, only truth. In a corner of the room, Kimball clicked through old camcorder footage. He showed Tosca a short clip he had found Elon, maybe 10 years old, standing in front of a makeshift microphone made of a paper towel roll, singing a song about Mars he had written himself. Tosca laughed unexpectedly, a short, genuine burst that softened her posture. "He really thought he'd get there," she said. "He still does," Kimball replied. In the quiet of the makeshift bedroom, May stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and in the half-light, she whispered, "Elon." He moved toward her, kneeling down once more. "I'm here," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Do you remember our last Christmas together?" Elon looked down. "I remember you crying on the balcony." May's gaze didn't shift. "I cried because I felt you slipping away. You were always so distant as a child, but that year, I felt like you were disappearing, and I didn't know how to stop it." He reached out and took her hand, slowly, almost reverently. His thumb brushed the top of her fingers, thin now, slightly chilled. "I didn't know how to stay," he said. Her other hand came up to touch his cheek, briefly, like a memory brushing skin. "I thought if I just worked harder, became more impressive, you'd see me," he whispered. "I always saw you, Elon," she said. Her voice trembled. "Even when I didn't know how to hold you." The words floated in the room, untouched, unchallenged. He didn't respond with logic or explanation, just silence, and his hand still holding hers. From outside came the faint hum of traffic, distant laughter, a siren. The world pulsed on in its electric haste. But inside the apartment, time had been suspended. They were two people once broken, now porous again, allowing presence where only walls had been. Tosca stood nearby, watching them. She said nothing, but something in her face shifted. Kimball kept recording. Not the words, just the scene, the light, the stillness, the fact that nobody had run away this time. At some point, May closed her eyes again. Her breathing deepened, steadied. Elon stood slowly, brushing a hand over his jeans. He didn't want to move too quickly, as if speed might shatter the fragile connection now forming. April touched his arm gently as he returned to the main room. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." Nobody clapped. No music swelled. There was no dramatic revelation, no neat resolution. But there was warmth. There was tea cooling in cups. There was a half-eaten pie and a scent of spices in the air. There was forgiveness, not spoken but felt, and that for the first time in years was enough. The last traces of dinner still lingered in the air, rosemary, thyme, and the comforting aroma of roasted pumpkin. Plates scraped clean, crumpled napkins folded neatly beside half-empty glasses of ginger ale and tea. The living room, though small and modest, now radiated a rare kind of warmth, not just from the overhead lights dimmed low, but from the air thick with something unspoken. The family moved slowly, almost reverently, gathering dishes and tidying the table as if performing a ritual. No one rushed. Each gesture carried weight, as though breaking the spell might return them to old patterns. Elon stacked plates carefully in the sink, running water with one hand while the other rubbed his neck, his muscles taut from holding so much inside. No one said it, but no one wanted to leave. He walked to the old record shelf beside the bookcase, his fingers brushing dusty spines until they found a familiar sleeve, Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong. He pulled the record from its sleeve and placed it gently on the turntable. The static began, then the soft rise of a trumpet, followed by Ella's velvet voice floating through the room. May turned her head at the sound and smiled, a smile not for anyone in particular, but for the memory itself. She closed her eyes and let the melody carry her back to another room, another life. Elon was 8, his knees bruised, his hands stained from drawing circuits with Crayola markers, and she, humming in the kitchen as jazz spun behind the noise of the blender. Errol saw the smile on her lips, and something in him softened. He extended a hand toward her, palm open, eyes steady. "Dance with me," he asked. She hesitated for only a breath, then placed her hand in his. They rose slowly, two people who had learned how to carry silence better than they ever carried each other. He drew her close and they began to sway, barely moving, more rocking than dancing, but enough. Elon, watching from the threshold of the kitchen, blinked back something sharp behind his eyes. He had not imagined them dancing. Not now, not here, but they did. And for once, it did not seem forced. It seemed like muscle memory, a fragment of peace too long forgotten. Kimball, holding his small camcorder close to his chest, didn't need prompting. He began filming without saying a word, slowly panning across the room. He didn't care about lighting or framing. He cared about catching the glimmer of truth. Tosca walked over to the sofa and sat beside Elon. No sarcasm, no remarks, just presence. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice lower than usual. "Did you know she was getting worse this quickly?" Elon shook his head. "No, but something told me it was getting late." Tosca nodded, lips pressed. Then she leaned gently against his shoulder. It was the first time since childhood that she had done that. Elon stayed still, letting her rest there. The old fights, the distance, all seemed to shrink in that stillness. From the kitchen, April emerged with a tray of freshly sliced fruit. She wore a soft maroon sweatshirt now, sleeves pushed up, her cheeks faintly pink from the warmth of the stove. She moved with a quiet attentiveness, placing the tray down on the coffee table and offering pieces to everyone with a shy smile. No one made a speech about it. No one needed to. May returned to her seat with a slow breath, cheeks a little flushed, but eyes bright. She looked younger somehow, not in body, but in spirit. She touched her temple, adjusted a loose strand of hair, and whispered to herself, "That was nice." The song faded, and with it, the moment melted into a fuller silence, not heavy, but whole. The kind of silence that happens when words have done all they can and hearts take over. Elon sat back and looked around. His family, here. Not perfect, not without splinters, but here. Kimball reviewed a clip on his camera and chuckled softly. Tosca glanced over. "What is it?" He turned the screen to her, revealing a grainy shot of Errol dipping May slightly, a move from some long-ago dance class. "Did you ever think you'd see that again?" he asked. Tosca gave a small smile. "No, and somehow it doesn't feel strange." The warmth in the apartment held them there, a cocoon against the brisk Palo Alto night, pressing against the windows. Outside, the world buzzed in blue light and deadlines. Inside, time bent. For a little while longer, no one moved. No one asked what came next. They let the music and the memory hold them. May touched her fingertips to her lips, as if sealing a private promise, then turned to Elon with a quiet breath. "Can we have a moment? Just you and me." Elon didn't speak. He simply nodded, his eyes holding a stillness that felt heavier than silence. They moved toward the far end of the apartment, where an old reading lamp cast amber light over a mattress laid out with mismatched blankets. It was the softest corner of the room, deliberately made gentle. They sat side by side, close enough that their shoulders brushed. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and wax. Outside, the world spun on, indifferent. But here, time slowed to whisper. May cleared her throat, her voice low and steady. "I didn't always know how to be your mother," she said. "Sometimes I was just a woman trying not to fall apart." Elon lowered his gaze. "You didn't fall apart," he replied after a pause. "You folded into yourself. I saw it even back then." She let out a small breath, half laugh, half sorrow. "I didn't think you were watching." "I was always watching," he said. "Maybe too much." They were quiet again. The kind of quiet that doesn't beg to be broken. Then, with slow fingers, May reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. It was small, red, faded. She laid it in his open palm. "A button." "I kept this," she said, "from your favorite sweater. The red one with the whales you used to wear every day until it fell apart. It came off the week you left. I almost threw it away." Elon looked down at it as if it were made of glass. "But I didn't," May continued, "because it reminded me that even if you were gone, some part of you was still here, still mine." He turned the button between his fingers, marveling at its worn edges. "I remember this," he said, voice thick. "You used to sew it back on every other week." "You never let me get rid of that sweater," she said with a smile that threatened to crack. "I didn't want to forget what it felt like to belong somewhere." May blinked quickly. Then, with no need for poetry, no effort to soften it, she said, "I'm sorry." He looked up. "I'm sorry for not protecting you more, for not listening harder, for needing you to be strong when you should have just been a boy. I know you carry things you never said." He didn't answer with words. Instead, he leaned forward, slowly, vulnerably, and rested his forehead against hers. Their eyes closed. Time stopped. It was not dramatic. It was not grand. It was human. And in that gentle leaning together, in that small merging of breath and bone, forgiveness passed between them, not spoken but known. Out in the living room, the rest of the family seemed to intuit what was happening. A hush settled like snowfall. Kimball quietly turned off his camera, laying it down on the counter as if even the lens should not intrude. Errol sat beside May's mother, their hands lightly intertwined. The old woman tilted her head toward him and whispered, "My daughter is in peace." In the kitchen, Tosca and April stood shoulder to shoulder at the sink, the faint clinking of dishes their only soundtrack. At one point, a dollop of whipped cream stuck to Tosca's elbow. April giggled. Tosca rolled her eyes but chuckled too. Something between them softened. In the corner, Kimball opened his journal and began to write slowly. The graphite scratched rhythmically across the page. "Today was the first time I saw my family whole." He underlined the last word twice. Back in the bedroom, Elon and May remained forehead to forehead, breaths mingling, hearts steady. "You don't have to say it back," she whispered. But he did. "I love you, Mom." Her face, lit in warm lamplight, held both joy and sorrow. "That's all I ever wanted to hear. Not because I doubted it, but because I needed to know it still lived somewhere inside you." Elon gently pulled the blanket over her legs. "It never left," he said. May leaned into him, resting her head on his chest like she used to when he was small and the world was loud. He wrapped one arm around her, the other still cradling the button between his fingers. Outside, a car passed on the street. A dog barked in the distance. Someone laughed in a nearby apartment. The world carried on as it always did. But in that dim little room, mother and son lay against the weight of everything unsaid, and finally, it was enough. They fell asleep like that. No ceremony, no dramatic exit line. Just closeness, just breath, just the red button still held in Elon's hand like a key to a door he thought he'd lost. And for the first time in decades, his sleep came gently. The morning slipped in softly, like a quiet visitor who didn't want to wake anyone. Outside the window, the sky was overcast, muted gray with hints of lavender stretching across the horizon. The air was cool, clean, and still carried a scent of the rain that had threatened all night but never quite arrived. A soft breeze pushed the curtain gently inward, making it sway like a lullaby. Elon was the first to wake. He lay curled on the small living room sofa, a checkered blanket half fallen from his shoulders. The couch had been too short for his long frame, and his neck ached slightly. But he didn't move right away. For a moment, he just listened to the hush of the house, to the soft hum of the refrigerator, to the breaths of his sleeping family in the rooms beyond. Then, slowly, as if afraid to shatter the fragile stillness, he stood and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The linoleum floor was cold under his feet. He reached for the kettle and filled it with water, placing it on the stovetop. As the flame clicked to life, he retrieved the coffee tin, unscrewed the lid, and paused for a moment to breathe in its familiar aroma. He stirred the coffee grounds into the French press with quiet reverence, like someone mixing memory into water. There was no rush in his hands. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. He had never been one for rituals, but this morning felt like it deserved one. In the other room, the door to the makeshift guest area remained slightly ajar. Elon walked to it, coffee still steeping, and glanced inside. May was still asleep, wrapped in a thick quilt, her silver blonde hair a gentle halo against the pillow. Her breathing was steady, peaceful. Elon knelt beside her and, after a brief hesitation, pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. She didn't stir, but a small smile twitched at the corner of her lips. He stood again, just as Errol entered the kitchen behind him, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," Errol muttered, his voice scratchy with sleep. Elon poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to his father, who accepted it without a word. They stood together in the kitchen, leaning against opposite counters, sipping quietly. After a few moments, Errol spoke. "You gave her something we didn't know how to give," he said softly. "You gave her a moment of peace." Elon didn't respond right away. He just stared at the swirling patterns in his coffee. "She gave it to me too," he finally said. April appeared next, her hair tied up in a loose knot, still wearing the oversized t-shirt she had slept in. She slid into one of the kitchen chairs and stretched. "They leaving today?" she asked, her voice groggy. "I think so," Elon said. "Maybe after lunch." April looked at him. "Will they come back for Christmas?" Elon offered a tired smile. "I hope so." From down the hall, the soft creak of floorboards signaled another presence. Tosca entered the kitchen in gray sweatpants and a hoodie, rubbing her temples like someone recovering from a long, emotional hangover. She grabbed a mug without asking and poured herself coffee. After a sip, she glanced at Elon. "Your turkey," she said, narrowing her eyes dramatically, "was better than Mom's." Everyone froze for a second. Then a beat later, they burst into laughter, April covering her mouth, Errol chuckling into his cup, Elon shaking his head in disbelief. Even May, still half asleep, smiled as she entered the room, drawn by the sound and the scent of coffee. "Who's slandering my turkey?" she asked, wrapping a cardigan around her shoulders. "Not slander," Tosca said, raising her mug in mock salute. "Just culinary justice." Elon moved to help his mother into a chair. He poured her coffee and added just the right amount of milk. She didn't even have to ask. She looked at him as he set it down and placed her hand briefly over his. A few minutes later, Kimball arrived holding his camcorder. "I stayed up editing," he announced, already fumbling with the buttons. "Wanna see?" He set the device on the table and pressed play. Everyone gathered around. The video wasn't polished, but it didn't need to be. It showed pieces of their night, the hesitant hugs, the shared laughter, the silent toasts. It showed May dancing with Errol, April bringing fruit, Tosca resting her head on Elon's shoulder. Soft piano music played under the images. And then came the subtitles, short, poetic captions that appeared without fanfare. Sometimes the silence is the loudest part. There are things only a table can repair. This is what it looks like to try. May watched with tears forming in her eyes. When the clip of her and Elon holding foreheads played, she touched her chest lightly. "I didn't think I'd ever see this," she whispered. "Us. Together. Peaceful." Elon turned to her, his own eyes wet. She looked at him and murmured, "Thank you." The apartment fell into a hush. But this time, it wasn't awkward or heavy. It was full. The kind of silence that holds rather than hides. The kind that says you're here. "I see you. I love you." After breakfast, the energy of the house shifted slightly. Suitcases were zipped. Coats were unfolded from chairs. But there was no rush. Everyone moved slowly, as if stretching time just a bit longer. In the corner, the grandmother napped again, her hands folded like prayer. April folded blankets on the couch. Tosca helped rinse mugs. Kimball whispered something to his camera, documenting a final thought. Elon stood by the window. The gray light outside had softened. The sky hadn't cleared, but it had lifted. There was space now between the clouds, a brightness trying to come through. He glanced back at the apartment. There were dishes in the sink, pillows scattered, a flower in a jar that someone, probably April, had set on the counter. It didn't look like perfection. It looked like life. And for the first time in years, Elon realized home wasn't a place you built with money or steel or silence. Home was a morning like this, where forgiveness brewed with coffee, where laughter rose like steam, where love didn't need to be said to be known. The sun had begun its slow climb behind a thin veil of clouds, casting a soft, golden hue across the quiet street below. The apartment remained hushed, filled with the stillness that only comes after a night heavy with meaning. April slipped on her coat and left before anyone else stirred, drawn by a quiet impulse, perhaps to bring something beautiful into a space that had begun tentatively to heal. She walked briskly through the sleepy Silicon Valley neighborhood, air crisp on her cheeks, her steps light on the pavement. The local bakery, tucked beneath an awning of ivy, smelled of warm yeast and cinnamon. She'd bought a bag of still steaming rolls, and beside the register, a modest bucket of wildflowers caught her eye. Sun-drenched chamomile, lavender, Queen Anne's lace. Without thinking, she picked a handful and added it to her purchase. Back at the apartment, the door creaked as she entered. Elon, seated on the edge of the sofa, turned. His hair was tousled from sleep, his expression unguarded. When April held out the bouquet, he blinked, surprised. "For the table," she said, but her voice was soft, like she knew it meant more. He reached for it slowly, like a child accepting something fragile. His fingers brushed hers as he took the flowers, and something in his chest tightened. He'd never been the kind of man to equate flowers with comfort, but now, holding those wild blooms, he felt something unspoken settle into place. Not everything had to be grand to be meaningful. May was already awake, seated by the window, bathed in soft light. Her face carried the beautiful fatigue of someone who had felt everything and survived it. As April placed the bread and flowers on the kitchen table, May turned to the room. "Let's sit," she said gently. "Not for breakfast, just together." One by one, they gathered. Elon, Tosca, still in her oversized sweater, Kimball, clutching a folded piece of paper, Errol, quietly alert, the grandmother, alert but silent, sipping warm water with lemon. May's voice didn't rise, but it filled the space. She looked at each of her children, and they felt it, the weight of being seen, not as who they were pretending to be, but as who they had always been underneath. "I want you to see me whole," she said, "not just as your mother, but as a woman, a daughter, someone who tried and failed and tried again." Tosca swallowed hard. Her voice came out thinner than expected. "I think I blamed you for not being more, but the truth is I just missed you, and I didn't know how to say that without making it sound like anger." May smiled faintly. Missing someone often does sound like anger. There was a silence, but it wasn't empty. It brimmed with acknowledgement. With permission, Kimball unfolded the paper in his hands. "I couldn't sleep last night, so I drew." He passed the sketch across the table. It was charcoal on recycled notebook paper. May asleep on the couch, her features softened into peace. Not idealized, just tender. Real. May pressed the drawing to her chest, her eyes misted. "You see the world with such gentleness. Don't let it harden, Kimball." Then, as if remembering something long overdue, she turned to Errol. He had been silent for most of the morning, but his presence was steady. When she reached across the table and took his hand, no one said a word. He squeezed her fingers. In his eyes, there was a long history, both unspoken apology and undiminished affection. Not romantic, perhaps, but real. Elon rose without explanation, walked to a tall bookshelf against the wall, and pulled out a worn copy of Brave New World. From behind its cracked spine, he retrieved a weathered envelope. "I wrote this when I was 17, he said, voice nearly inaudible. "But I never gave it to you." He placed it in her hands and sat down. May opened the envelope slowly, the paper inside creased from years of being kept, maybe read, maybe rewritten. As her eyes scanned the contents, her expression shifted, pain, regret, astonishment. The words were raw, accusations born of loneliness, teenage fury, longing dressed as defiance. But laced between them were fragments of hope, glimmers that he had still wanted her to reach for him. When she finished, May exhaled. "Even wounded, you were still searching for me." Elon's throat tightened. There was nothing left to say. But that was the gift of this morning. It didn't need words. Just breath, just presence. From her seat, the grandmother watched quietly, then smiled. A small, fragile thing, but it lingered. The smile of someone who had waited a lifetime to see such mending and had nearly given up hope. As if on cue, a beam of sunlight slipped through the window, lighting the table. It struck the vase of wildflowers, now set at the center, making the petals almost glow. It lit the lines on May's face, the shadows under Elon's eyes, the freckled cheek of Kimball, the quiet resistance in Tosca, the softened edges of Errol's profile. None of them noticed the sun at first, but slowly the light demanded their attention. It didn't change anything, and yet in a way, it changed everything. Elon reached across the table and adjusted the bouquet slightly, as if to keep it centered. The silence held, not out of awkwardness but reverence. They weren't the same family they were yesterday. They weren't the family they thought they had to be. But they were here. Whole, not because nothing was broken, but because they'd stopped pretending they weren't. And sometimes that's what healing looks like, not a clean slate, but a marked one, still warm with memory and shared breath. A return not to what was, but to what still could be. And in that room, in that light, on that table scattered with wildflowers, bread, and forgiveness, the unexpected had finally found its way home. The cold of late autumn curled gently around the neighborhood like a cat settling in for the evening, present, but not yet biting. The sky was a soft, quilted gray, diffusing the morning light into something delicate and almost private. After breakfast, slices of bread from a local bakery, and a last of the pumpkin pie, it was April who first suggested they go for a walk. "I think we should take this outside," she said, standing by the window. "The day's too quiet to waste." It didn't take much convincing. They needed movement after the density of the past few days, not just in their bodies, but in their hearts. May adjusted her scarf and took Elon's arm. She didn't ask for it, he simply offered it instinctively. It surprised them both how natural it felt. She walked with deliberate care, but her steps were steady. Her hand tightened slightly at each curb, each uneven sidewalk slab, not from fear but from memory. They passed a tiny flower shop tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up video store. The sign above the awning read "Gin's Flowers" in faded lettering, and the window was filled with small vases and seasonal blooms, chrysanthemums, sprigs of pine, and tucked near the corner, a cluster of golden yellow ranunculus. Elon paused, then without saying anything, stepped inside. The bell above the door rang a note so familiar it might have come from another decade. When he emerged a minute later, he held the bouquet carefully, like it might fall apart if he moved too fast. He held it out to May. She took it slowly, as if afraid it would vanish with a blink. Her fingers trembled slightly. "You never needed much," she said, her voice catching just above a whisper. "Just courage." He didn't answer, just nodded. They continued walking. In the park 2 blocks over, they found an old wooden bench with peeling green paint. Leaves in every shade of bronze, crimson, and ochre blanketed the path, crunching under their shoes. The air smelled of damp earth, chimney smoke, and something faintly citrus from a nearby tree. They sat May, Elon, Tosca, Kimball, April, and Errol, all close together, not for warmth, but for something else. Solidity, maybe? Presence. Tosca, always sharp and often aloof, reached over and held Elon's hand. Not in hesitation or awkwardness, but with a quiet confidence that said, "I see you." Elon blinked but didn't let go. Across from them, Kimball balanced his camcorder on his knee and framed the shot, their mother staring upward, the yellow flowers cradled in her lap, the clouds passing slowly behind her. The lens clicked softly. May looked at the sky, as if expecting to see something written there. "I was never good at keeping things," she murmured. "Books, earrings, notes. I lose them. But I kept you. Here." She pressed her palm to her chest. Elon leaned over wordlessly and rested his head on her shoulder, just as he had countless times as a boy, when his nightmares had felt too big or the world had been too loud. May exhaled slowly, her eyes open and focused on nothing. "You used to do this after violin practice. Every Sunday." "I remember," he whispered. From beside, Errol lifted his old analog camera. He waited, then clicked the shutter. The image captured not just faces, but what lingered between them, the delicate bond of something rebuilt, something real. Back at the apartment, the air felt different. Lighter, maybe, or simply warmer, as if the building itself had noticed they had returned changed. April set the flowers in a chipped porcelain vase. Elon straightened the pillows on the couch. Even Tosca folded the used blankets rather than tossing them aside. There was no need for grand conversation. No one was trying to solve anything. They were simply together, and that was enough. Elon struck a match and lit a single beeswax candle in the center of the dining table. The flame flickered like a heart just waking up. He stared at it for a moment, then said almost to himself, for choosing to stay. With each other. May stepped forward. Her fingers brushed his temple. Then gently, she kissed his forehead. The gesture was slow, maternal, and profoundly final in a way that made the room exhale. "It was a good day," she said. The words were simple. They held no decoration. But the weight of them, of what they had survived to say them filled the air like a final chord on a cello, deep and resonant. No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed color. Once jagged and heavy, it now lay soft and golden, like the leaves that covered the sidewalks outside. In the corner, the little analog photo developed slowly on the table, its chemicals working to bring light and shadow into focus. In it, you could see a mother with yellow flowers on her lap, a son leaning against her shoulder, and a family seated not perfectly, but wholly, wrapped in scarves and stories, history, and hope. And in that quiet apartment in Palo Alto, nothing spectacular happened. Only everything. The night had deepened, folding gently around the apartment like the final page of a long-forgotten book. Outside, the city dimmed into murmurs, the traffic now no more than a whisper behind window panes fogged from the inside. The air was still, carrying that crisp trace of early winter. Inside, the world had narrowed to one thing: presence. May sat in the corner of the couch, her posture graceful but undeniably frail. Her breath came slower than it had earlier in the evening. She smiled at nothing in particular, as if listening to a story no one else could hear. Elon noticed it first, the way her hands trembled slightly, her eyelids lowering just a little too long between blinks. He stepped toward her, quiet as snow. "Mom." She looked up, gently startled. "I'm just tired, sweetheart," she said. Her voice was calm, but softer than he remembered it ever being. Without a word, he offered his hand. She took it. In silence, he helped her to her feet and led her to the room they had prepared, a small corner of the apartment converted into a quiet haven. The mattress was firm, layered with blankets and a pillow that still smelled faintly of lavender from April's careful touch. The lamp beside it gave off a golden glow, warm and forgiving. Elon helped her sit. Her hands lingered in his. She began, her voice faltering like a radio tuning in between stations. "Do you still remember that little song you used to sing? The one I taught you? When you were scared of the dark?" He paused. His throat tightened before he could stop it. "I think I do." May smiled, a drowsy sort of peace blooming in her features. "Sing it for me, would you?" So he did. His voice was low, uncertain at first, as if brushing dust off forgotten lyrics. But then it found its rhythm, quiet and fragile, like something that had waited years in the dark to be spoken aloud again. "Stars above your window pane. Mommy's near, through joy and pain." May closed her eyes. Her lips moved soundlessly with the words. "Close your eyes, the night is kind, and dreams will come to those who find." He could barely finish. The words caught in his throat, and for a moment he just sat there watching her. She wasn't sleeping yet, but she wasn't entirely here either. She had drifted somewhere inside, and whatever place she found, it had softened her. The room was quiet, except for the faint clicking of the radiator and the distant shuffle of a cup being set gently onto a table in the kitchen. In the living room, everyone had fallen into their own form of stillness. Errol stood by the window, the city lights reflected in his tired eyes. Without turning, he spoke, voice low. She waited for that, just for that. Tosca and Kimball had taken to the rug, sitting cross-legged with their backs against the old couch. Between them sat a pillow, as if anchoring the weight of years they hadn't dared carry before. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. April, with her quiet grace, moved between kitchen and table, arranging mugs with hot chamomile tea. She didn't ask who wanted it. She just placed them where she knew they'd be needed. When Elon returned, he stood still for a moment at the edge of a room, taking it all in. His eyes were rimmed with red, but he was composed, as if grief had curled inside him into something gentler. "She's asleep," he said. The words hung in the air, full of weight and reverence. Errol turned from the window and placed a firm hand on Elon's shoulder. "Let time take care of her now." The sentiment settled over them like a soft blanket. No more was said. April handed Elon a cup of tea, their fingers brushing briefly. He gave her a quiet thank you and sat down beside his siblings, knees pulled to his chest. Across the room, the candle they had lit at dinner still burned, a small, tenacious flame that refused to flicker despite the stillness. It cast long shadows across the walls, illuminating framed photos, worn-out spines of books, and a vase of fading flowers. In that room, in that moment, the past didn't seem so far away. Kimball reached into his bag and quietly handed Tosca a napkin. She looked puzzled until she saw the smudge of mascara beneath her eye. She smiled, not with amusement, but with the strange grace of someone letting down an old wall. At the table, May's mother, barely awake, rested in the rocking chair. Her face, once lined with years of waiting, now held something closer to peace. Her granddaughter had found her way back home, and so had her great-grandson. From somewhere behind them, the soft hum of a melody, the same lullaby, played again, only now it was coming from Kimball's small recorder. Elon's earlier song had been captured, preserved. Errol sat on the arm of the couch, leaned forward, and listened with his eyes closed. April, now seated near the door, looked around the room and whispered, "This wasn't just a dinner." No one responded, not because they didn't agree, but because there was nothing else to say. The hour grew late. Outside, the wind nudged gently at the windows. Inside, the candle burned low, but steady. The scent of tea mingled with old memories. And as the night folded in around them, it became clear that something more than food had been served that evening. Something had shifted, healed, even if imperfectly, because this had never been about recipes or roast turkeys. It had been about the quiet bravery of coming home, about showing up, about listening where once there was only silence. And in that dim apartment where forgiveness had no speech but all presence, the last page of the recipe had finally been written. Not in ink, not in words, but in something far more enduring, love rediscovered. The apartment felt different now, not empty, but quieter in a way that made sound itself seem out of place. The kind of quiet that comes after the last page has turned and the story has paused, suspended in the heart. Elon stood in the kitchen, his fingers brushing against the rim of a chipped ceramic mug that had belonged to his mother. He didn't drink from it. He just held it, like an echo in his hand. May had passed away 3 nights earlier, just before dawn. There had been no struggle, no final gasp. Just a slowing of breath, a settling of limbs, a peace that was almost ceremonial. She had gone while surrounded by the very people she once feared she'd lost forever. In the days that followed, the apartment transformed into a strange cocoon. The presence of family lingered like the scent of something warm just pulled from the oven, soothing even in sorrow. No one rushed to leave. They stayed, to fold laundry, to brew tea, to remember. Errol took it upon himself to help Elon sort through May's belongings. They worked in near silence, surrounded by old scarves, perfume bottles, and a drawer filled with loose photographs. In one small velvet box beneath a stack of postcards, Errol found it, the little red button from Elon's childhood sweater. He handed it to Elon gently, almost reverently, and neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, Elon found an envelope, plain and cream-colored, and wrote 6 words in his steady hand, "For when you forget who you are." He sealed the button inside and placed the envelope on the bookshelf next to a copy of The Little Prince. In the living room, May's mother sat wrapped in a soft shawl. Her gaze drifted between the flickering candle and the wilted tulips by the window. She didn't say much, but when Elon brought her a cup of chamomile tea, she touched his wrist lightly and said, "I think I'll stay until the flowers give up. That's when the soul begins to settle." He nodded. That made sense somehow. Tosca, who had always kept her emotions folded tightly beneath sharp comments and skeptical glances, surprised them all when she began making soup. It wasn't much, just potatoes, onion, a sprig of rosemary, but the aroma filled the apartment with something close to comfort. She ladled it out for everyone without saying a word. When Elon thanked her, she shrugged, then smiled. She likes simple things, she said. Later that afternoon, Elon and April took a slow walk around the block. The sun was low and wintry, casting pale blue shadows over the pavement. Their hands found each other naturally. April didn't speak for a while. When she finally did, her voice was low and wondering. "Do you feel different?" Elon looked at her, then at the sky. A small plane left a soft white line across the clouds. Like something that used to be out of place, finally settled, he answered. Not healed, not whole, just placed. April squeezed his hand. That was enough. Back inside, Kimball was finishing the video. He'd spent hours editing, layering May's laughter over silent clips of her walking through the kitchen, adjusting Elon's collar, listening to Tosca read aloud. The footage was raw and unpolished. Some clips were shaky, others out of focus, but there was something alive in it, something truthful. He added a gentle piano melody under May's voice, saying, "We try. That's all we ever really do." Then faded to black. That night, they gathered again in the small living room. Errol on the floor with a pillow under his elbow, Tosca curled in the corner with her soup, the grandmother bundled in a throw blanket. Elon stood behind the couch, arms crossed, uncertain. Kimball hit play. There were no introductions, no transitions. Just images, movement, glances, the warmth of skin and cloth and breath. A dinner table, laughter, stillness. May's hand brushing her son's cheek, her voice rising gently over candlelight. When she appeared on screen smiling, no one spoke. The room filled instead with breath held and released, with the quiet weight of unspoken things. Elon sat down slowly. His mother's face, soft and lined, alive with dignity, flickered across the screen. He let himself feel everything. The guilt, the gratitude, the missed years, the fragments of love woven like fine thread through every frame. The video ended with a wide shot of May asleep, her face turned toward the light from a window, peaceful and strong. Kimball turned off the screen. No one moved for a long time. Then Elon closed his eyes. "She stayed," he said softly. The room didn't need explanation. Everyone knew what he meant. May had stayed in the way she always had, in discipline, in memory, in stubborn grace. She hadn't left. She had simply become something the room would always hold. And in that silence, filled not with absence but with presence, they remained. Not as a perfect family, but as a real one. One that had fractured and frayed and stitched itself together through shared loss, laughter, and long overdue honesty. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves along the sidewalk. Inside, the candles still burned. Spring arrived gently in the valley. Not with sudden blooms or bright proclamations, but in the quiet way the breeze shifted, softer, more forgiving. The kind of spring that made people open their windows not out of necessity, but hope. Elon's apartment, once bare and hesitant, had grown into something else. The window sills now cradled small ceramic pots with marigolds and lavender, stubbornly alive under his imperfect care. The curtains had changed too, hand-sewn by his grandmother from a pale linen with faint blue flowers. They fluttered like memories every time the wind nudged them awake. On one of the walls hung a dozen photographs from that evening. Not stage portraits, but stolen moments. May holding her teacup with both hands, Kimball laughing with his eyes closed, Tosca wiping her cheek, pretending it wasn't a tear, April watching Elon with that unmistakable look, the one that says you are known. Each image told the same story in different dialects of silence. The dining table, still the same scratched-wood slab he'd once apologized for, had become a quiet witness to a new rhythm. It bore bowls of fruit, mugs of half-finished tea, and notebooks with folded corners. It echoed laughter some evenings, sighs on others. It was no longer a set piece, it was a hearth. Tosca came by more often, sometimes unannounced, sometimes with flowers, always a little more present than before. She brought her music too, humming while she folded dish towels, leaving little post-its on the fridge with jokes or stubborn bits of wisdom. Kimball visited too, usually with film rolls in his backpack and unbrushed hair. He took photos of everything, the way Elon stirred coffee, the slant of the light at 4:17 p.m., the lines on their grandmother's hands as she crocheted. Once, he placed his camera on the table and said, "I don't think I'm filming us. I think I'm filming healing." Their grandmother, though slower now, carried a lightness in her steps. Her voice trembled a bit more, but her presence remained sturdy. She'd begun knitting Elon a scarf, deep red, the exact shade of the button May had left him. "So you always remember," she'd said. "And not just the pain." April, as always, brought something unexpected. One afternoon, as the sunlight stretched long and golden across the floorboards, she kneeled beside Elon with a tiny wooden box carved with constellations. Inside was a ring made from a meteorite fragment, gray and quiet and ancient. She held his gaze and said, "You are my home." Elon's eyes filled, but he didn't need time to answer. "Yes," he said, voice low. 1,000 times yes. Errol had returned to Pretoria, but kept a promise he'd made silently the night May passed. Each week, a letter arrived. In his spidery handwriting, he told stories from a youth Elon had only glimpsed in fragments. Letters full of nostalgia and redemption, childhood birthdays, rainstorms in South Africa, how May once ran barefoot for blocks after a lost kite. Elon read them aloud to whoever was there. Sometimes April, sometimes Kimball, often no one, always May. And one day, after reading a line where Errol described May dancing alone in the kitchen after a long shift, Elon whispered, "She was more than I ever knew." One morning, Tosca taped a note to the refrigerator door. It read, "You didn't just cook a turkey. You rebuilt the roof over our heads." He left it there untouched. For weeks. Kimball, meanwhile, had nearly finished the documentary. It was more than a home video. It was a tapestry, interlacing scenes from the dinner with old Super 8 clips of their mother teaching Elon to tie his shoes, of May sitting on the porch brushing Tosca's hair, of Kimball as a baby giggling at the camera. It didn't try to explain anything. It just showed that they had once belonged to each other, and maybe still did. Elon began something new as well. In the quiet hours between midnight and morning, he would sit at the table with a stack of old family photos and a black pen. On the back of each photo, he wrote a recipe. Some were real, his version of the pumpkin pie they'd eaten that night. Others were metaphorical, how to apologize without using the word sorry. Or ingredients for remembering someone after they're gone. He wasn't sure what he would do with them, but felt like planting seeds. He kept the envelope with the red button in his top drawer. Some nights, he would open it, hold the button, and read May's last handwritten note. "For when you forget who you are." Spring progressed slowly. The days grew longer. Trees bloomed despite no one watching. Life did what life always does. It found cracks and grew things in them. One afternoon, as the breeze came in smelling faintly of jasmine and soil, April came into the kitchen to find Elon leaning over the table, writing. She asked what he was doing. He said, without looking up, "Just rooting myself." And she nodded, knowing exactly what that meant. There were still hard days. Days when the silence was a little too loud. When grief curled up beside him like an old friend. But the apartment no longer echoed, it breathed. Sometimes he'd walk past the framed photographs and pause. Not because he missed them, but because they were still here. In the room, in the walls, in the light, in him. And somewhere deep inside, in a place that used to ache constantly, now lived something small but steady. Not happiness exactly, but something better. Belonging. Elon Musk, for the first time in his life, no longer felt misplaced. He had become his own home, piece by piece, memory by memory, button by button, and he was still building, still blooming, even after goodbye. A new autumn brushed softly across Palo Alto, the air tinted with gold and the rustling of leaves that had begun to let go. Trees released their colors like quiet declarations of change, and the sidewalks were speckled with orange and brown, familiar, fleeting, and beautiful in their fading. Elon walked through a local farmer's market as the sun dipped toward the horizon. He ran his fingers lightly over the skin of a pumpkin before placing it gently in a reusable canvas bag. Then another. Then a third. He didn't need them all. Not really. But he bought them like his mother had, by instinct, by feel, by memory. May had always said that a home should carry the seasons on its table. The smell of cinnamon and roasted almonds lingered in the breeze. Children weaved between stalls. And as Elon turned the corner toward home, he saw her, no more than 6 or 7 years old, sitting alone on a stretch of sidewalk, her small face blotchy and damp with tears. He didn't approach too quickly. Instead, he crouched at a careful distance and said in a soft, steady voice, "It's okay to cry. Sometimes the heart just needs to rinse the eyes." The girl looked up, startled but not afraid. Her breath caught in her throat. Elon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a tiny wildflower, one he'd picked without thinking during his walk. He offered it to her, cupped in his open palm, like a secret. She took it slowly, then gave the smallest, most sincere smile he'd ever seen. From across the street, April watched with quiet warmth, one hand in her coat pocket, the other resting just above her heart. She didn't move, didn't wave, just let him be there, fully himself, fully seen. And she loved him more for that. Back home, the apartment had taken on the soft glow of early evening. Elon set the pumpkins near the kitchen window, washed his hands, and began preparing dinner. The music was low, a favorite jazz record May used to hum along with. The clinking of dishes, the bubbling of soup, and the rhythmic tap of the knife on the cutting board became a soundtrack of comfort, of ritual. Soon, the door creaked open and familiar voices trickled in. Tosca entered first, carrying a tray of roasted vegetables and wrapped in a thick beige scarf. "It smells like a memory in here," she said with a half-smile. Kimball arrived with his camera slung across his chest and a warm pie in his hands. "I didn't film the pie being made," he joked. "Some things deserve to remain sacred." April lit candles. The air was filled with something unspoken, but deeply understood. And then, one by one, they filled the small dining room. No one knocked. No one rang a bell. They came like family does, at the rhythm of the heart. Each brought something. Tosca, a joke only she could deliver. Kimball, a video clip from 10 years ago showing May dancing barefoot. The grandmother, now slower, but still elegant, brought a crocheted napkin holder she made that morning, shaped like a sunflower. Errol arrived last, holding nothing but an envelope he handed to Elon with a nod. A new letter. Another story of May. Another piece of her kept alive. At the table, everything had its place, including the spot no longer filled by presents, but by memory. A hand-stitched napkin marked it, May. Elon unfolded it gently, as if touching her skin. The candle beside it flickered softly, its flame smaller now, but still lit, still warm. No one made speeches. No one tried to summarize what couldn't be contained. Instead, there were long silences that didn't ache, laughter that didn't hide pain, just togetherness, acceptance. Kimball filmed, yes, but he didn't interrupt the moment. He let it breathe, let it unfold. He captured Elon brushing a strand of hair from April's cheek, captured their grandmother closing her eyes for a moment as if listening to the echo of May's voice, captured Tosca laughing too hard at her own joke, captured life, unfiltered. Elon sat at the head of the table now, not because anyone asked him to, but because the shape of the room had changed. He held a ceramic mug in both hands, chamomile and honey, his mother's favorite. His eyes drifted across the table. He saw not perfection, but fullness. Tears didn't come. He wasn't sad. He wasn't euphoric. He was steady, present, whole in a way that had once seemed impossible. He glanced once more at the embroidered napkin. Then, to no one in particular, barely above a whisper, he said, "Love stayed. That's what remained. And it was enough." And somehow, in the gentle clatter of dishes and murmured thanks, everyone heard it. Dear viewer, if this chapter stirred something inside you, a memory, a scent, a moment long gone, tell me in the comments. What stayed with you? I read and respond every one with care and heart.